They paraded me as a failure, until a stranger asked the right question. They didn't try to disguise it. That night they made a point of turning Laura into the family's example of failure. Sideways comments, uncomfortable laughter, imposed silence. She didn't react, until a stranger watching everything asked a question too simple to ignore. The silence that fell afterward wasn't embarrassment, it was fear. Laura Mendes's name never came accompanied by pride in her family. While they celebrated visible careers and traditional paths, she followed a silent route, far from applause and comparisons. That dinner, officially, was meant for something else. But as always, Laura ended up becoming the contrast, the story that served to teach what not to do. She listened to everything without justifying herself, not out of weakness, but from understanding that explaining only fed the judgment. What no one expected was that someone from outside was truly paying attention. And when that person asked the right question, the narrative built against Laura lost its ground, because silence doesn't always hide failure. Sometimes it hides something that can't yet be revealed. Laura Mendes learned early that her place in the family was predetermined, carved out before she could even understand what it meant. She was 7 when she first heard her Aunt Margaret whisper to her mother in the kitchen, "Well, at least you have Daniel. Not every child can be exceptional." The words weren't meant for her ears, but they found them anyway. They always did. Daniel was her older brother, 3 years ahead, effortlessly brilliant, the kind of child who collected awards like other kids collected baseball cards, science fairs, debate tournaments, academic honors. Their father's eyes would light up whenever Daniel entered a room, a brightness that never quite appeared for Laura. At family gatherings, the pattern was always the same. Adults would circle around Daniel, asking about his latest achievement, his college plans, his future. Laura would sit quietly at the children's table, picking at her food, watching the performance unfold. "And Laura?" someone would occasionally ask, as if suddenly remembering she existed. Her mother's smile would tighten. "Laura's doing fine. She's finding her way." The pause before those last words said everything. Finding her way was family code for disappointing us. By age 10, Laura understood the narrative that had been written about her. She was the cautionary tale, the proof that genetics were a lottery, the reminder that not everyone could live up to the family name. The Mendes family prided themselves on visible success. Her grandfather had built a regional real estate empire. Her father was a prominent attorney. Her uncle ran for city council. Success in their world meant recognition, status, something you could frame and hang on a wall. Laura's interests didn't fit the template. She loved puzzles, patterns, systems. She would spend hours in her room, building elaborate structures with whatever materials she could find. Cards, books, wooden blocks. Her mind worked differently, connecting dots others couldn't see, finding solutions through unconventional paths. But there were no trophies for that, no ceremonies, no proud announcements at Sunday dinners. In middle school, when her grades were consistently good but not exceptional, her father started making jokes, light ones at first, delivered with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, we can't all be Daniel, can we?" Laura's keeping her expectations realistic. That's actually very mature. Not everyone's cut out for the pressure of high achievement. Each comment was a small cut. Individually, they seemed harmless. Collectively, they bled. Her mother tried to help in her own way, which somehow made it worse. She would defend Laura by lowering the bar. "Laura's very creative," she'd say, as if creativity were a consolation prize. "She has a good heart," as if kindness were what you praised when there was nothing else to mention. Laura learned to make herself smaller. She stopped volunteering answers in class, even when she knew them. She stopped sharing her ideas, her projects, her dreams. Why invite comparison? Why give them more material? By high school, she had perfected the art of invisibility. She chose a small desk in the back corner of her room, instead of claiming the larger one Daniel left behind when he went to college. She stopped attending family events where extended relatives would gather, claiming homework or feeling unwell. When she did attend, she mastered the skill of being present but unnoticed, smiling politely, nodding at appropriate moments, never saying enough to become the center of attention. Her guidance counselor, Ms. Patterson, noticed something was wrong during their junior year meeting. "Your test scores are excellent, Laura. Have you thought about where you want to apply?" Laura shrugged. "Somewhere small, nothing competitive." Ms. Patterson frowned, flipping through Laura's file. "Laura, your standardized test scores put you in the top 5% nationally. Your grades are solid. You could apply anywhere. My family doesn't really—" Laura trailed off. How do you explain that you've been cast in a role you can't escape? Your family doesn't what? Expect much. From me. Ms. Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. What you've learned to expect from yourself is far more important than what anyone else expects. Remember that. Laura never forgot those words, though at the time she didn't fully understand them. She graduated high school without fanfare. While Daniel had received a congratulatory dinner at the country club with 40 guests, Laura's graduation was acknowledged with a card and a small check. "We're proud of you," her mother said, the words feeling rehearsed. Her father nodded absently, already thinking about Daniel's upcoming law school orientation. Laura chose a state university 2 hours away, not too close, not too far, respectable but not impressive, exactly what her family expected. And for a while she lived down to those expectations. She told them she was studying business administration, vague enough to be acceptable, specific enough to avoid questions. She came home for holidays but kept visits short. She shared just enough information to seem transparent while revealing nothing real, because somewhere during those years, Laura had made a decision. She would let them keep their narrative, let them believe their version of her story, let them think they understood who she was and what she was capable of. But in the space she created through their indifference, she would build something they couldn't see, something they wouldn't expect, something that didn't need their approval to be real. The imposed identity they had given her, the quiet one, the disappointment, the cautionary tale, became her camouflage. And while they stopped paying attention years ago, Laura started paying attention to everything else. What Laura's family didn't know could fill libraries. They didn't know that she switched her major 3 months into college. Business administration became applied mathematics and computer science. She never mentioned it, and they never asked specific enough questions to discover the truth. They didn't know about the undergraduate research position she secured sophomore year, working with Dr. Sarah Chen on algorithmic optimization problems. They definitely didn't know that her name appeared on 2 published papers before she graduated. When her mother asked what she was doing, Laura would say, "Just some project work. Nothing major," which was technically true and completely misleading. After graduation, while Daniel was making headlines with a high-profile case at his father's law firm, Laura quietly accepted a position at a mid-sized tech company in Austin. On paper, it sounded modest. Data analyst, decent salary, nothing to brag about. What the job title didn't convey, she was part of a specialized team developing predictive models for supply chain optimization. The kind of work that happened in the background of major industries, invisible but essential. Laura excelled at invisible but essential. Within 18 months, she was leading projects. Within 3 years, she was consulting independently, working with clients who paid her more in a month than her family assumed she made in a year. She lived simply. A modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a reliable but unimpressive car, clothes from normal stores, nothing that would prompt questions or require explanations. But she invested aggressively. Stock portfolios, index funds, real estate investment trusts. She had learned from her grandfather's success, even if he'd never bothered teaching her directly. She read voraciously, finance, economics, market analysis. She applied the same pattern recognition skills that made her good at mathematics to understanding market movements. By 30, Laura's net worth exceeded her brother's, despite his fancy title and corner office. By 32, she could have retired if she wanted to. She didn't want to. The work fascinated her. Each problem was a puzzle, each solution a small victory. She loved the intellectual challenge, the satisfaction of finding elegant answers to complex questions. She also loved the freedom that money quietly bought, freedom to say no, freedom to choose, freedom to exist on her own terms without needing anyone's approval or support. Her family knew none of this. When they asked about her work, which was rarely, she kept answers vague and brief. "I do consulting work, systems optimization mostly." Their eyes would glaze over. Perfect. They assumed she was doing okay, scraping by, making ends meet, the successful enough to not be worried about, but not successful enough to be proud of category. Laura did nothing to correct this assumption. She attended family gatherings infrequently, always with an excuse ready. Work deadlines, prior commitments. She was careful to maintain just enough contact to avoid seeming estranged, while keeping them at arm's length from her real life. Her apartment reflected this dual existence. The living room was spare, unremarkable, but her home office was a different world. 3 monitors, high-end equipment, walls covered with whiteboards full of calculations and diagrams. This was where she lived, in the space between numbers where patterns revealed themselves to those patient enough to look. She had friends her family never met, professional colleagues who respected her expertise, a small but genuine social circle built around shared interests rather than blood obligation. One friend, Marcus, asked her once why she maintained the charade. Why not just tell them? Show them what you've accomplished? Laura considered the question seriously. Because it wouldn't change anything. They've decided who I am. Evidence doesn't alter identity narratives. It just creates cognitive dissonance. They'd find ways to diminish it, explain it away, or worse, suddenly want to be involved. That's pretty cynical. That's pretty realistic. But there was more to it than that, though Laura rarely articulated it even to herself. Part of her enjoyed the invisibility. After years of being underestimated, there was power in being undervalued. No one asked favors she didn't want to give. No one had expectations she needed to manage. No one tried to take credit for her success or claim they always knew she had it in her. The imposed identity they'd given her, the disappointment, the lesser sibling, had become her protection. She was free in a way Daniel never would be. He carried the weight of family expectations, the pressure to maintain his position, the constant need to prove he deserved the pedestal they'd placed him on. Laura had no pedestal, and therefore no fear of falling. Her work spoke for itself in the circles that mattered. She had a reputation in her field, not fame, but respect, the kind of professional credibility that opened doors and created opportunities. She spoke at conferences occasionally, always in specialized venues her family would never attend or hear about. She mentored younger professionals, particularly women and others who seemed to be fighting against imposed narratives of their own. "You don't owe anyone the story they want to tell about you," she told one mentee, a brilliant young woman whose family couldn't understand why she chose coding over law school. "Let them keep their version. Build your own truth somewhere they're not looking." The advice came from hard-won experience. By the time Laura turned 33, she had built a life that was entirely hers, successful by any objective measure, though not in ways that translated to family dinner conversation. She was respected in her field, financially secure, intellectually fulfilled, surrounded by people who valued her for who she actually was, not who she failed to be. She had, against all their expectations, won. They just didn't know it yet, and Laura was fine with that. Until the invitation arrived. The email came on a Tuesday afternoon, sent by her mother with the subject line, "Family celebration, your presence requested, requested, not invited, requested." Laura read it twice, looking for the trap. "Dear Laura, your brother Daniel has some wonderful news to share, and we're hosting a dinner to celebrate this Saturday at the Belmont Room. The family would like you to be there. It's been too long since we've all been together. Please let me know if you can attend. Cocktails at 7, dinner at 7:30. Love, Mom, the Belmont Room." That was the first red flag. It was the same venue where they'd held Daniel's law school graduation celebration, his engagement party, his promotion dinner, the Mendes family stage for public triumph. Laura's graduation had been at Olive Garden. The email's careful phrasing was the second flag. "Your presence requested" had a formal, almost obligatory tone, not "we'd love to see you" or "hoping you can make it." Requested, like a court summons. And that line, "It's been too long since we've all been together," was particularly interesting. Laura had seen most of them at Christmas, barely 4 months ago. In family time, that was recent. She opened her calendar. Saturday evening was clear, though she'd been looking forward to a quiet night working on a particularly interesting optimization problem for a new client. The smart thing would be to decline, send regrets, prior commitment, work deadline, anything. But Laura had learned to recognize the setup. If she didn't attend, it would become part of the narrative. Laura couldn't even be bothered to celebrate her brother's success. Too jealous, probably. Too insecure. She could already hear her Aunt Margaret's voice, dripping with false concern. It's such a shame when siblings let competition damage their relationship. And if there was one thing Laura refused to be, it was absent from her own story. She replied with a single line, "I'll be there." Her mother responded within minutes, which itself was telling. "Wonderful, looking forward to seeing you. Dress is cocktail attire." Of course it was. Laura spent the next few days trying to figure out what Daniel's news might be. Partnership at the firm? Probably, though he was a bit young for that. Political appointment? Possible given his father's connections. Another award or recognition. She checked Daniel's social media, something she rarely did, but found nothing recent. No hints, no teases. Whatever it was, they were keeping it quiet until the official announcement. Friday night, Laura stood in her closet, considering her options. She owned exactly 2 cocktail dresses, one black, purchased for a work gala, one navy, bought for a friend's wedding. She chose the navy. Black felt too severe, like she was attending a funeral, though in some ways, maybe she was. Saturday arrived with that peculiar weight that comes with anticipated discomfort. Laura spent the morning working, trying to focus on code and algorithms, but her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. At 6 o'clock, she showered and dressed carefully. Simple jewelry, minimal makeup, hair pulled back in a low bun. The goal was to look appropriate without looking like she'd tried too hard. The drive to the Belmont room took 40 minutes. Laura knew she could have left later. She'd deliberately aimed to arrive on time rather than early. No need to endure extra minutes of small talk. The parking lot was already full. She recognized her father's Mercedes, her uncle's BMW, her Aunt Margaret's Lexus. The whole family was there, plus what looked like several other cars. So not just family then, an audience. Her stomach tightened. Laura sat in her car for a moment, gathering herself. Through the large windows of the restaurant, she could see people mingling, drinks in hand, laughter floating out into the parking lot. She remembered something Dr. Chen, her research advisor, had once told her. The most powerful position in any room is the one nobody expects you to hold. Underestimation is a strategic advantage. Laura had been underestimated her entire life. Tonight, she'd let them continue. She got out of the car, smoothed her dress, and walked toward the entrance. Whatever they had planned, whatever narrative they were constructing, whatever role they'd written for her in tonight's performance, she'd play along, for now. The doorman smiled and held the door open. Laura stepped inside, into the warm light and the sound of familiar voices. The celebration was about to begin. The moment Laura entered the private dining room, she felt the atmosphere shift, not dramatically, not in a way that anyone outside the family would notice. But after 33 years of reading their micro-expressions, their meaningful glances, their practiced smiles, Laura could sense the current of anticipation running beneath the surface pleasantries. "Laura!" Her mother appeared immediately, air-kissing near her cheek. "You made it. You look nice." The pause before nice said everything. "Thanks, Mom. What's the occasion?" "You'll find out soon enough. Come, let me introduce you to some people." The room was larger than Laura expected, with about 30 guests scattered in small conversational clusters. She recognized most family members, but there were others, colleagues of her father's, family friends, people who orbited the Mendez social circle. Daniel stood at the center of the largest group, handsome in a tailored suit, holding court with the practiced ease of someone used to being the focus. Next to him was Melissa, his fiancée, blonde and polished and perfect in every way that family expectations demanded. He spotted Laura and waved, his smile bright and seemingly genuine. "Laura, you came." There was surprise in his voice, as if her attendance was unexpected despite the presence-requested email. She made her way over, accepting his brief hug. "Congratulations on whatever we're celebrating." Daniel laughed. "You'll see soon enough. It's good to see you, really. Been a while. Christmas was 4 months ago." "Right, yeah, seems longer." It was a small thing, easily missed, but Laura caught it. The way his eyes shifted to their father standing nearby, the way his smile became slightly fixed. Daniel wasn't driving this evening. He was performing in it. Her father approached, drink in hand. "Laura, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. How's work?" he asked, the question automatic, his attention already drifting. "Busy. Productive. Good, good. Still doing that computer thing? Systems optimization consulting? Yes." He nodded absently. The way you nod when someone's talking about something you consider beneath real notice. "Well, as long as it pays the bills." Laura smiled thinly and said nothing. Her Aunt Margaret materialized with the precision of a heat-seeking missile. "Laura, darling, my goodness, it has been ages. You look healthy." That word, healthy. Code for, you haven't made any efforts I'm willing to acknowledge. "Thanks, Aunt Margaret. You look well." "Oh, I've been staying busy. Bridge club, charity work, helping coordinate the Historical Society fundraiser. Keeping active, you know. Purpose is so important." The implication hung in the air, unlike some people. More family members cycled through, each interaction following the same pattern. surface pleasantries masking subtle digs, questions asked with no real interest in the answers, comparisons lurking in every comment. Her cousin Jennifer, Daniel's age and recently promoted to senior vice president at her father's real estate company, couldn't resist. "So, Laura, still in Texas, are you thinking about moving back home? It must be hard being so far from family." "I like Austin. The tech scene is good." "Tech scene?" Jennifer laughed lightly. "That must be interesting. Different from what we do, certainly. Very different. Well, I'm sure it suits you. Not everyone's cut out for high-pressure environments." The patronization was breathtaking in its casual delivery. Dinner was called, and Laura found her place card at the far end of the table. Of course, Daniel sat at the head, their father to his right. Key family members and important guests clustered close. Laura was positioned between her cousin's husband, a man she'd met twice and who seemed uncomfortable at family events, and an elderly family friend who was already deep in conversation with the person on his other side. Perfect isolation disguised as inclusion. The first courses arrived. Conversations flowed around her, through her, occasionally about her in the third person, as if she weren't present. "Laura's always been the quiet one," her mother explained to someone who'd asked. "Very internal. Not like Daniel. Daniel's always been our star. It's good that she found something she can do," her aunt added. "Not everyone has Daniel's drive. Different temperaments," her father said philosophically. "You can't force ambition." Laura cut her salmon carefully, chewing slowly, saying nothing. The stranger appeared somewhere between the second and third courses. Laura noticed him because he was clearly not family, too casual in his observation, too curious in his attention. Mid-40s maybe, wearing a well-cut suit but somehow not quite fitting the corporate mold. He was seated further down the table, but kept glancing around the room, watching interactions with an analytical eye. The business associate of her father's, maybe. Or Daniel's. Someone from outside the family ecosystem who'd been invited for networking purposes. Laura filed him away mentally and returned to her salmon. The main course arrived, and with it, the first direct attack. Her Uncle Richard, loosened by wine and encouraged by audience, decided to be funny. "You know, Laura, I was thinking the other day about how different you and Daniel turned out. Same parents, same upbringing, completely different results. Funny how that works." Polite laughter rippled around the table. "It's like," Richard continued, warming to his theme, "one kid gets all the good genes and the other gets, well, the other gets to be supportive family." More laughter. Her mother looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Her father smiled into his wine glass. Daniel, to his credit, looked genuinely distressed. "Uncle Richard, oh, I'm just kidding around. Laura knows I'm teasing. Right, Laura? You've always been a good sport about these things." Every eye turned to her. This was the moment she was supposed to laugh it off, play along, confirm that yes, she understood her place, and accepted it with good humor. Laura looked up slowly, meeting her uncle's eyes. "I've always been quiet about these things," she corrected softly. "There's a difference." The distinction landed like a stone in still water. Uncle Richard blinked, his smile frozen. He hadn't expected a response, however mild. "Well," he said, recovering. "Quiet, sure, that's Laura. Always in the background, unlike some people." He raised his glass toward Daniel. "To Daniel, who's always known how to shine." The table echoed the toast, grateful for the redirect. But something had shifted subtly. That small correction, quiet about these things, not good sport about them, had introduced a hairline crack in the evening's comfortable narrative. And the stranger Laura had noticed earlier was watching her now with unmistakable interest. His expression wasn't pity or embarrassment. It was curiosity. His name was James Carver, though Laura wouldn't learn this for another 20 minutes. What she noticed first was that he stopped participating in the ambient conversation around him. While others continued their chatter, their laughter, their performance of familial warmth, he had gone still, observant. He wasn't looking at Daniel, despite Daniel being the evening's focal point. He wasn't watching Richard bask in the laughter his joke had generated. He was watching the table's dynamics, the invisible currents of power and dismissal that shaped every interaction, and he kept returning his attention to Laura, not in a romantic way. Nothing about his gaze suggested that. It was analytical, the way an investigator might watch a suspect whose story doesn't quite add up, or the way a journalist might notice the person everyone else is determined to ignore. Laura had become expert at being invisible. She could read a room, understand its social geometry, and position herself in the blind spots of collective attention. It was survival skills she'd honed over decades, but James Carver had somehow learned to see past invisibility. Dessert arrived, an elaborate tiered cake decorated with gold leaf and Daniel's firm's logo in edible ink. The presentation was unnecessarily grand, which meant the announcement was coming soon. Her father stood, tapping his wine glass with a knife. The room quieted immediately, all attention snapping to him like iron filings to a magnet. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his lawyer's voice filling the space with practiced authority. "We've gathered to celebrate a significant milestone in our family, and I can't think of better people to share it with." He placed his hand on Daniel's shoulder, the gesture of claim, of pride, of public ownership. As many of you know, Daniel has been working at Morrison & Hale for the past 5 years. He's handled complex cases, won significant judgments, and built a reputation as one of the most promising young attorneys in the state. Applause, nods, affirmations from around the table. Tonight I'm thrilled to announce that Daniel has just been named the youngest partner in Morrison & Hale's 120-year history. The room erupted, genuine excitement mixed with obligatory enthusiasm. Daniel stood, modest smile in place, accepting handshakes and congratulations. "But that's not all," his father continued, voice rising with theatrical timing. "Daniel has also been asked to join the Governor's Advisory Council on legal reform. At 32, he's the youngest appointee in the council's history." More applause, louder now. This was genuinely impressive. Political appointment at that level meant connections, influence, future possibilities. Laura clapped politely, watching her brother navigate the attention with the ease of long practice. He did look happy, genuinely pleased. She felt no resentment toward him personally. Daniel had always been kind to her in private, even if he'd never publicly defended her against their family's narrative. He was playing the role assigned to him, just as she was playing hers. Their father wasn't finished. "We've always known Daniel was destined for great things. From the time he was young, it was clear he had something special. That drive, that intelligence, that presence." He paused, his eyes scanning the table, landing briefly on Laura before moving past. "Of course, not every child is marked for this kind of success. Some people find different paths, quieter paths, and that's okay too. A family needs balance." The word balance was delivered with a particular emphasis. It meant supporting role. It meant lesser. Laura felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old childhood hurt trying to surface. She pushed it down through long practice. But across the table, James Carver had stopped eating entirely. His fork rested on his plate, forgotten. His expression had shifted from curious to something harder to name. Not quite anger, not quite confusion. Disbelief, perhaps. He was looking at Laura with open question in his eyes. "Are you hearing this?" She met his gaze briefly and gave the smallest shrug. "Welcome to my family." Daniel started to give his acceptance speech, thanking people, acknowledging support. He mentioned their father's guidance, their mother's support, Melissa's patience. Standard grateful, successful person rhetoric. He didn't mention Laura. Why would he? She was backdrop. The speech concluded with more applause. Champagne was poured. Toasts were raised. The celebration swelled with collective satisfaction. Her Aunt Margaret chose that moment to twist the knife one more time. "You know," she said, her voice carrying across the table with practiced projection, "I was just thinking about how proud your grandfather would be of Daniel. He always said success runs in families, but it doesn't distribute equally. How right he was." She glanced at Laura when she said, "doesn't distribute equally," making sure everyone caught the implication. Several people laughed uncomfortably. Others nodded sagely, as if Margaret had said something profound rather than cruel. Laura looked down at her untouched dessert, and James Carver set down his champagne glass. His movement was deliberate, careful. He cleared his throat, not loudly, but with enough intention that people nearby turned toward him. "I have a question," he said quietly. The conversations around him faded. His tone wasn't aggressive, but there was something in it that demanded attention. "For Laura, actually, if you don't mind." Every face at the table turned toward her. For the first time that evening, Laura was the center of attention, and she had no idea what was coming next. The silence that fell across the table was absolute. Laura looked up from her dessert to find every eye locked on her, some curious, some confused, a few openly annoyed that the celebration's momentum had been interrupted. James Carver waited patiently, his expression neutral but intent. "Sure," Laura said carefully. What's your question? Her father shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable with this deviation from script. I'm sorry, I don't think we've been properly introduced. James Carver, he said, extending his hand across the table. I'm consulting with Morrison and Hale on their new data integration project. Daniel invited me tonight. My apologies for interrupting the celebration. Daniel looked confused. Oh, yeah. James, I forgot you were able to make it. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, I'm curious about something. He turned back to Laura. I've been listening to people talk tonight, and I keep hearing references to your work. That computer thing, the tech scene, systems optimization consulting. Laura's pulse quickened. She wasn't sure where this was going. I work in technological integration, James continued. I've spent 20 years helping companies upgrade their infrastructure, optimize their systems, implement new frameworks. It's my entire career. He paused, his eyes locked on hers. So my question is simple. What exactly do you do? Specifically. It was such a straightforward question, almost absurdly simple, but no one in her family had ever asked it. Not specifically, not with genuine interest, not wanting an actual answer, rather than a vague description they could quickly dismiss. Laura felt her mother's tension from across the table, the unspoken plea. Don't make a scene, keep it brief, don't embarrass us. She could give a vague answer. Keep playing the role. Say something about consulting and data analysis, and let it fade back into background noise. Instead, she heard herself answer honestly. I design and implement algorithmic optimization systems for supply chain management and resource allocation, Laura said clearly. Primarily for mid to large-scale manufacturing and distribution companies, I build predictive models that help them reduce waste, improve efficiency, and save significant operational costs. James leaned forward slightly. How significant? My last 3 clients saw average cost reductions between 18 and 34% within the first year of implementation. A ripple of surprise moved through the table. Those were extraordinary numbers. And how long have you been doing this? James asked. About 8 years professionally. I started during my graduate work. Her mother's voice cut in, sharp with confusion. Graduate work. Laura, you have an undergraduate degree in business. I have an undergraduate degree in applied mathematics and computer science, Laura corrected gently, and a master's in computational optimization from UT Austin. The silence deepened. Her father stared at her. You have a master's degree? I do. Since when? I graduated 7 years ago. Daniel was shaking his head in disbelief. Laura, why didn't you tell anyone? Laura looked at her brother, then at her father, then at the faces around the table, reflecting various stages of confusion and dawning comprehension. I did tell you, she said simply. Multiple times. You just never asked follow-up questions. That's not, her father started, then stopped, because it was true. Laura could see him trying to remember conversations, trying to recall what he'd actually asked versus what he'd assumed. She'd mentioned going back to school. She'd mentioned changing her focus, but he'd never asked details because he'd never cared enough to know. James wasn't finished. And your client base, how many active clients do you maintain? I typically work with 5 to 7 companies at a time, currently consulting for 6. Revenue? The question was bold, bordering on inappropriate, but James asked it with the professional directness of someone who understood that numbers told truth. Laura hesitated for only a moment. Last year, just under 800,000. This year's on track to exceed 1 million. Someone dropped their fork. The sound rang like a gunshot in the stunned silence. Her uncle Richard, who'd made the joke about genetic distribution, had gone pale. Her Aunt Margaret's mouth hung slightly open. Her father looked like he'd been struck. You make... Daniel couldn't finish the sentence. His salary as a new partner, while generous, was nowhere near that number. James Carver leaned back in his chair, a small smile playing at his lips. He looked around the table, taking in every shocked face, every struggling expression. Funny, he said quietly. That doesn't sound like someone who needs support. That sounds like someone who's built something remarkable. He raised his champagne glass toward Laura. Congratulations on your success, Ms. Mendez. The floor had just dropped out from under the entire evening's narrative. No one moved. The celebration that had filled the room moments ago had evaporated, replaced by a vacuum of stunned disbelief. Laura sat very still, feeling exposed in a way she'd carefully avoided for years. Every protective layer of obscurity she'd built had just been stripped away by a stranger's simple questions. Her mother was the first to try to regain footing. Laura, this is... Why would you hide this from us? I didn't hide it, Mom. I just didn't announce it. But a master's degree, a consulting business. Her voice rose slightly. These aren't things you just don't mention. Laura's facade of composure cracked slightly. I mentioned going back to school. You told me I was wasting time when I could be building a career. I mentioned changing my major. Dad said computer stuff was fine for those types of people, but not a real profession. Her father flinched. I never said. You said exactly that. At Christmas 4 years ago when I tried to explain what I was studying. The specificity of the memory landed heavily. This wasn't vague recollection. This was precise detail, the kind that comes from words that cut deep enough to be remembered forever. Daniel looked between them, confused and defensive. But Laura, you could have just told us anyway, showed us what you were doing. Why? Laura's voice was quiet but steady. So you could minimize it? Explain it away? Tell me it was nice that I'd found something I was good at, said in a tone that meant something small? So I could watch you trying to reconcile this version of me with the one you'd decided I was? That's not fair, her mother protested. Isn't it? Laura looked around the table. Tell me honestly, if I'd announced 2 years ago that I was making $500,000 a year, what would have happened? The silence was answer enough. Her Aunt Margaret, recovering from her shock, tried a different tactic. Well, this is all very impressive, Laura, but money isn't everything. Daniel's work has real impact. He's helping people, shaping policy. I helped a medical supply distributor optimize their logistics system. Laura interrupted, her voice calm but firm. They cut delivery times by 40%. That means hospitals get critical supplies faster. That means patients get treatment sooner. That means lives saved. She turned to another family member. I worked with a food distribution company to reduce waste in their cold storage system. They now waste 30% less perishable food, which means more food reaches communities that need it and less rot in landfills. Her voice grew steadier with each example, years of unspoken accomplishment finally finding words. I built a resource allocation model for a disaster relief nonprofit that helps them deploy supplies more efficiently after natural disasters. I designed a scheduling algorithm that helps a healthcare network balance patient loads across facilities so people wait less time for care. She paused, looking at her aunt. I don't have a nameplate in a high-rise or a title that sounds impressive at cocktail parties, but my work has impact. It just happens in spreadsheets and servers instead of courtrooms and council chambers. James Carver was nodding slowly, a look of vindication on his face. I've seen your papers, actually. Didn't make the connection until tonight. You published on multivariable optimization problems in constrained systems. Your algorithm for dynamic resource reallocation was brilliant. You've read my work? Laura couldn't quite hide her surprise. Of course. Anyone serious about optimization has read your work. You're kind of a quiet legend in the field. Quiet legend. The phrase hung in the air, an inadvertent indictment of everything the evening had represented. Her father was shaking his head, still processing. I don't understand. Why would you keep this from us? Why not share it? The question was so genuinely confused that Laura almost laughed. Dad, for my entire life you've compared me to Daniel. You've made it clear that my value was measured by how close I came to his standard. Do you have any idea what it's like to grow up knowing that no matter what you did, it would never be good enough because you weren't him? That's not, we never meant. Her father floundered, the practiced lawyer losing his words. You called my graduation a milestone and his a triumph. You threw him a party with 40 people at the country club. I got a card and dinner at Olive Garden. That's different. He was graduating law school. I was graduating college at the age most people graduate. With honors, it still mattered. Her mother's eyes were welling up. Laura, we love you. I know you love me, Laura said, and her voice was gentler now. I know you do, but you've never seen me. You decided who I was when I was 7 years old, and Daniel got his first academic award. You wrote a story about the brilliant son and the struggling daughter, and then you stopped paying attention to whether that story was actually true. She looked around the table, at faces reflecting various stages of shame, defensiveness, and unwilling recognition. I let you keep that story because it was easier than fighting it. I built my life in the space where you weren't looking, and honestly, it was better that way. I didn't have to perform for you. I didn't have to live up to expectations or manage your pride. I could just be good at what I was good at, without it meaning anything about my worth in your eyes. Daniel looked stricken. Laura, I'm so sorry. I should have noticed. You were busy being golden boy. That wasn't your fault. Laura's voice held no bitterness, just tired truth. You played your role, I played mine. The family system needed both. Melissa, Daniel's fiancée, spoke for the first time all evening. What role was that? Laura looked at her, this woman who was marrying into the narrative. The cautionary tale. The reminder of what happens when you don't try hard enough, don't shine bright enough, don't become what they need you to be. My job was to be the contrast that made Daniel's light look brighter. The words landed like accusations because they were simply true. Uncle Richard, who'd made the joke about genetic distribution, couldn't seem to meet her eyes now. His funny comment took on a different weight in this new context. Not humor, cruelty. James Carver caught Laura's eye across the table. His expression communicated something wordless. You didn't deserve this. You deserved better. And everyone at this table knows it now. The celebration had become something else entirely. An accounting, a reckoning, a truth that could no longer be conveniently ignored. The silence stretched like pulled taffy, uncomfortable and sticky. Finally, her father tried to recover, to restore some semblance of control. He was a lawyer. He built careers on controlling narratives, redirecting attention, reframing uncomfortable truths. Well, he said, his voice attempting joviality, this is certainly surprising news, Laura. We're very proud of what you've accomplished. Of course we are. Perhaps we should have been more attentive to the details. The word details doing heavy lifting there, as if her entire career, her education, her success were mere details they'd overlooked, rather than deliberately ignored. Perhaps we can talk more about this later, her mother added quickly. Tonight is about Daniel. Tonight was supposed to be about humiliating Laura, James said quietly. Every head turned toward him. His calm delivery made the words hit harder. Excuse me? Her father's voice had gone cold. I've been watching all evening, James continued, unintimidated. The seating arrangement, the comments about quiet paths and balance, the joke about genetic distribution, the repeated references to Laura's work in diminishing terms. He looked around the table. I consult with companies all the time, and I've learned to read organizational dynamics. This wasn't celebration, this was ritual humiliation, disguised as family gathering. Now wait just a minute. Uncle Richard started to stand. You called her the example of what not getting the good genes looks like, James cut in. In front of 30 people, you thought it was funny. It wasn't. It was cruel. The air in the room had changed. Other guests, friends, colleagues, people outside the family, were shifting uncomfortably. Some were looking at their plates. Others were looking at Laura with new understanding, recontextualizing every comment they'd heard through the evening. This wasn't just family dynamic. This was public cruelty witnessed by people who could spread this story, reshape reputations, alter social standing. Her Aunt Margaret tried to salvage it. We're a family that teases. Laura knows we don't mean anything by it. Don't you, Laura? The question put Laura in an impossible position. Agree and validate the abuse. Disagree and become too sensitive. But something had broken in Laura. Some dam that had held for 33 years. No, she said simply. I don't know that. Her mother's face crumpled. Laura, please don't do this. Not here, not now. Do what? Tell the truth? Isn't that what just happened? Laura's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath now. You wanted me here tonight. I came. You wanted me to witness Daniel's triumph. I witnessed it. You wanted me to know my place. I know it. The problem is, my place isn't what you thought it was. You're being dramatic, her father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? James is a stranger who asked more substantive questions about my work in 5 minutes than you have in 8 years. He knew my research. He'd read my papers. He understood what I do, and he'd never met me before tonight. Daniel pushed his plate away, his celebration dinner forgotten. Laura, what do you want from us? It was an honest question, asked without defensiveness. Perhaps the most honest thing anyone in her family had said all evening. Laura considered it. What did she want? I don't want anything, she said finally. I wanted acknowledgement, recognition, pride. I wanted those things for years, but I built a life without them. I found my own validation. I don't need yours anymore. Then why come tonight? Her mother asked, voice breaking. Because if I didn't, you would have used my absence as more evidence. Laura couldn't even be happy for her brother. Too jealous. Too petty. I came to deny you that narrative. The accuracy of that prediction made several family members wince. One of her father's law partners, a distinguished older man Laura vaguely recognized from previous events, cleared his throat. If I may. he said carefully. "I think perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Families have complex dynamics." "There's no misunderstanding," Laura interrupted. "Just consequences finally catching up with choices." She stood up slowly, placing her napkin on the table with deliberate care. "I want to be clear about something," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "I don't resent Daniel. He worked hard for his success. He earned his partnership and his appointment. I'm genuinely happy for him." She looked at her brother and her expression softened. "You've always been kind to me, Danny. In private. I appreciate that, even if you never defended me in public." Daniel looked down, shame evident in every line of his body. Laura turned to her parents. "I don't hate you. I understand you saw what you expected to see. People do that. But expectations don't create reality. They just create blindness." Her father started to speak, but she held up her hand. "I'm going to leave now. Not because I'm upset, but because there's nothing more to say. You can finish celebrating. You should celebrate. Daniel deserves that." She picked up her purse, her movements calm and measured. "Laura, wait." Her mother reached out. "For what? An apology? You can't apologize for 3 decades in one night. A promise to do better? You'd have to first understand what you did wrong, and I'm not sure you do yet." She turned to James Carver, this stranger who'd somehow seen her when her own family couldn't. "Thank you," she said simply. "You didn't have to do that." He nodded, respect clear in his eyes. "Yes, I did. Someone had to." Laura walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the polished floor. The sound echoed in the absolute silence. At the door, she paused and looked back. "I hope the cake is good," she said. "It looked expensive." Then she was gone, leaving 30 people sitting in the wreckage of their comfortable assumptions. The night air hit Laura's face like cool water. She stood in the parking lot for a moment, breathing deeply, her hands slightly shaking from the adrenaline of confrontation she'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Behind her, through the restaurant's windows, she could see the dining room dissolving into chaos. People were standing, talking urgently. Her mother had her head in her hands. Her father was gesturing emphatically. Daniel sat frozen at the head of the table, his celebration thoroughly derailed. Laura walked to her car slowly, deliberately, not running, not fleeing, just leaving. Her phone buzzed before she reached the driver's door. "Daniel." "Laura, please. Can we talk?" She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "Not tonight, maybe next week. Congratulations again. You earned it." She meant it. Daniel's success was legitimate, regardless of how it had been weaponized against her. Another message, this time from her mother. "How could you embarrass us like that?" The fact that her mother's first thought was embarrassment rather than understanding told Laura everything she needed to know. She didn't respond. She sat in her car but didn't start the engine. Not yet. She needed a moment to process what had just happened. For 33 years, she'd played a role. The quiet one. The disappointment. The cautionary tale. She'd accepted that role because fighting it seemed harder than enduring it. She'd built her real life in the margins, in the spaces they didn't bother to look. And in one evening, a stranger had torn down the entire facade. She should feel vindicated, triumphant even. Instead, she felt strangely empty, because the truth was she'd already won. Years ago, when she'd stopped needing their approval, when she'd built something real and meaningful on her own terms, when she'd found validation in her work, in her client's success, in her professional reputation. The only thing that had changed tonight was that now they knew, and knowing changed nothing that mattered. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Laura Mendes," she said. "Ms. Mendes, this is James Carver. I hope you don't mind. I got your number from Daniel's phone. He was distracted." Laura found herself smiling slightly. "That's mildly stalkerish. I prefer resourceful. Look, I'm leaving now. This party is dead anyway. Can I buy you a coffee or something stronger?" "Why?" "Because you just handled an impossible situation with remarkable grace, and I'd like to apologize for putting you in it. You didn't put me in anything. You just revealed what was already there." "Still." "Coffee." Laura considered. She should go home. Process this alone, in familiar space. Return to the life she'd built, the quiet success that didn't need witnesses. But something made her say, "There's a diner about 2 miles from here. Fletcher's. Good coffee, terrible pie. I'll find it. 20 minutes? See you there." She ended the call and sat for another moment in the quiet darkness of her car. Then she started the engine and drove away from the Belmont room, from the celebration that had imploded, from the family that was probably still sitting in stunned silence, trying to figure out how the evening had gone so catastrophically wrong. Fletcher's Diner was exactly where diners should be, on a semi-industrial stretch of road, fluorescent lights bright against the darkness, chrome and vinyl and formica unchanged since 1987. Laura took a booth in the back and ordered coffee, black. James arrived 18 minutes later, still in his suit but with his tie loosened, looking like he'd survived something traumatic. "That was the most uncomfortable dinner I've ever attended," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "And I once had Thanksgiving with my ex-wife's family after the divorce papers were filed." Laura laughed despite herself. "Sorry you got caught in the crossfire. Don't apologize. I inserted myself deliberately." He ordered coffee from the waitress, then looked at Laura seriously. "I need you to understand something. I didn't do that to be a white knight or to cause drama. I did it because I've spent 20 years working in systems, and I've learned to see patterns. And what I saw tonight was a massive systems failure. A systems failure. Your family has completely miscalibrated their assessment mechanisms. They're measuring success by the wrong metrics, seeing what they expect rather than what's real, and using you as a control group for their narrative about Daniel. It's actually fascinating from a systems perspective, horrifying from a human one. That's an interesting way to analyze family dysfunction. It's how I analyze everything." He sipped his coffee, made a face at its strength. "But more importantly, I wanted to tell you that your work is exceptional. I wasn't flattering you at dinner. I've genuinely followed your research. You're solving real problems in elegant ways. The field respects you, even if your family doesn't understand what you do." Laura felt unexpected emotion rising in her throat. "Thank you. That means more than it probably should." "It means exactly what it should." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two strangers bonded by an evening's chaos. "What happens now?" James asked. "With your family?" Laura considered the question seriously. "I don't know," she admitted, "but for the first time in my life, I'm okay not knowing." Laura didn't go home that night. She drove instead, taking the long way through the empty downtown streets, past the river, out to the overlook where the city lights spread below like fallen stars. She parked and sat, windows down, letting the cool night air clear her head. Her phone was a constant buzz of activity, messages from family members, each trying to rewrite the narrative in real time. From her mother, "We need to talk about tonight. This isn't how families communicate." From her father, "Your behavior was inappropriate. We'll discuss this when you've calmed down." From Aunt Margaret, "I hope you're satisfied with yourself. You ruined Daniel's celebration." From Daniel, "Laura, please call me. I feel terrible. I had no idea. I'm so sorry." That last one hurt in a different way, because Daniel was genuinely sorry, which meant he'd genuinely been blind, not malicious, not intentionally cruel, just oblivious to the dynamics that had shaped Laura's entire existence. Maybe that was worse. She didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she opened her email and found the draft she'd been working on for weeks, a proposal for a new consulting model, something she'd been hesitant to pursue because it would require visibility, speaking engagements, industry presence, being seen. She'd been avoiding visibility her whole life. Maybe it was time to stop. She revised the proposal, strengthened the pitch, and hit send to 3 major industry contacts. Then she drove home. The next morning, Sunday, her phone started ringing at 8 a.m. Her mother. Laura let it go to voicemail. By noon, there were 7 missed calls and 15 text messages. Her father had upgraded from demanding to pleading. Her mother had cycled through anger, hurt, and manipulation. Aunt Margaret was still focused on how Laura had ruined everything. Daniel had sent one text, "I'm here when you're ready. No pressure." At 2 p.m., Laura finally responded to him, "Coffee on Tuesday? There's a place near my hotel. You're in town until Tuesday. I live here. Austin's my home." There was a long pause, then, "Right. Of course. Tuesday works. I'm really sorry, Laura. I know. See you then." Monday morning, Laura was back at her desk, reviewing code for a client implementation, when her phone rang. Unknown number, but local. "Laura Mendez. Ms. Mendez. This is Patricia Walton from the Governor's Advisory Council office. Is this a good time?" Laura's heart stuttered. "Sure, how can I help you?" "We've received some interesting information about your work in systems optimization." James Carver, who serves as a technology consultant to several council members, suggested you might be valuable for a project we're developing regarding state resource allocation. Laura processed this carefully. James Carver suggested me. He was quite emphatic, actually. Said you were one of the best in the field. We've reviewed your published work and client outcomes. Impressive results. Thank you. We're putting together a task force to examine how the state manages emergency resource distribution. Recent natural disasters have exposed significant inefficiencies. We need someone who can analyze current systems and propose optimization models. Would you be interested in consulting on this? It was the kind of project Laura dreamed about. Real impact at scale. Exactly the work she'd trained for. It was also directly adjacent to Daniel's new role on the council. Can I ask, Laura said carefully, does this have anything to do with Daniel Mendez? Your brother? No, this came through completely different channels. Though I understand he's recently been appointed to the council. Small world. Patricia paused. Is that a problem? Laura thought about it. A week ago, she would have declined to avoid any overlap with her family's world. She would have stayed invisible, stayed separate, stayed safe in her carefully constructed independence. But something had shifted Saturday night. No, Laura said. It's not a problem. I'm very interested. Excellent. I'll have my assistant send over the project details. We'd like to meet next week if possible. After the call ended, Laura sat staring at her computer screen. Her email pinged. Responses to her proposal from the night before. All three contacts were interested. One wanted to schedule a call immediately. Her careful invisibility was dissolving whether she wanted it to or not. Tuesday afternoon, Laura met Daniel at a coffee shop in a quiet neighborhood, far from anywhere they might encounter family. He looked exhausted. Suit rumpled, tie absent, shadows under his eyes. You look terrible, Laura said, not unkindly. I haven't slept much since Saturday. He ordered coffee, black like hers, and they sat in a corner booth. Laura, I don't even know where to start. Start with the truth. Did you know? About how they treated you? Yes and no. He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I knew they compared us. I knew you were quieter, less visible, but I genuinely didn't realize how bad it was. The things they said Saturday, the way they talked about you, I heard it differently than I've heard things before. Because someone outside the family called it what it was. Yes. He looked miserable. I've been thinking about it constantly, replaying memories, recontextualizing things. Your graduation, your birthday parties, every family event. I was so focused on my own stuff, my own success, I didn't notice they were using you to make me look better. It wasn't your job to notice. Yes, it was. You're my sister. I should have defended you. I should have said something when Uncle Richard made those jokes, when Dad dismissed your work, when Mum treated your achievements like consolation prizes. Laura sipped her coffee, studying her brother's genuine distress. Danny, I'm not angry at you specifically. You were born into a role just like I was. Golden child isn't easier than scapegoat, it's just different. They put expectations on you that were probably crushing. That doesn't excuse... No, it doesn't. But I understand it. She leaned back. Here's what I need you to understand. I built a good life. A life I'm proud of. I didn't do it to spite them or to prove anything. I did it because I'm good at what I do and I love doing it. Their approval would have been nice, but I didn't need it. You shouldn't have had to build your life in secret. Maybe not, but I did, and it's mine, and it's real. She smiled slightly. And now they know, which is its own kind of vindication. Daniel shook his head in amazement. You make almost twice what I make. You have a master's degree they didn't know about. You're published. You're respected in your field. And you just never mentioned any of it. I mentioned it. They didn't listen. There's a difference. What happens now? With the family? Laura had been thinking about this question for 2 days. I don't know. That's up to them. If they want to actually know me, really know me, ask questions, listen to answers, I'm open to that. But I'm not going to perform for them. I'm not going to prove my worth or justify my choices. They can accept me as I actually am, or they can keep their comfortable narratives. Either way, I'll be fine. That's very mature. No, it's very tired. I'm too old to fight for scraps of approval from people who should have given it freely. They sat in silence for a moment. The council project, Daniel said finally. Patricia Walton called me, asked if I had any concerns about you consulting on it. Do you? God, no, you're probably the best person for it. I told her exactly that. He smiled weakly. I also told her that if she was smart, she'd hire you for about 6 other projects. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. I've been riding family advantages my whole life. The least I can do is use whatever influence I have to make sure you get opportunities you've more than earned. Laura felt her throat tighten. Thank you. Laura, I know I can't fix what happened. I can't go back and defend you when I should have, but I can do better going forward. If you'll let me. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. I'd like that. 3 months after the dinner, Laura stood at a podium in front of 200 industry professionals, presenting her optimization framework at the National Conference on Systems Efficiency. In the audience, she spotted James Carver, who'd become both a friend and occasional collaborator. He gave her an encouraging nod. She didn't spot any family members. She hadn't expected to. The presentation went flawlessly. Afterward, during the networking reception, she was approached by a steady stream of people, potential clients, fellow researchers, journalists interested in her work. You're becoming quite visible, James observed, handing her a glass of wine. It's terrifying, Laura admitted, but also liberating. How are things with your family? Laura considered the question. Complicated. Dad sent an email last month, stiff and formal, but it was an attempt at apology. Mum's still struggling with the cognitive dissonance. Aunt Margaret hasn't spoken to me, which is honestly a relief. And Daniel? Daniel's trying, really trying. We have lunch every few weeks. He asks real questions now, listens to the answers. It's strange having a brother after all these years of having a family competitor. That's progress. It is. Slow, awkward progress. She smiled. They'll probably never fully understand what they did. How their narrative shaped my entire childhood. How their dismissal became my invisibility cloak. But they're trying to see me now. That's something. Is it enough? I don't know. But it doesn't have to be. That's the thing I've learned. She gestured around the conference room at the evidence of her professional success. This is enough. The work is enough. Being respected by people who understand what I do, that's enough. You've built something remarkable, James said seriously. Not just professionally, but personally. You survived being unseen and built a life where you're valued. That's its own kind of triumph. Later that evening, alone in her hotel room, Laura received a text from Daniel. I know you're in Chicago for your conference. Dad and I watched your presentation. They live-streamed it. You were brilliant, genuinely brilliant. I'm proud of you. Then another message. Dad wants me to tell you he's proud too. He's not great at saying it directly yet, but he's trying. Laura stared at the messages for a long time. A year ago, those words would have meant everything. They would have been the validation she'd waited for her entire life. Now they were just words, nice words, appreciated words, but not necessary ones. She typed back, Thanks, Danny. That means a lot. How's your case going? Simple. No emotional weight. Just a sister asking her brother about his work, because that's what she'd become. Not the disappointment, not the cautionary tale, not the invisible failure used to highlight someone else's success. Just Laura, exceptional at what she did, respected by those who mattered, living a life that was entirely her own. The victory wasn't in being seen by her family. The victory was in building something so real, so substantial, that it existed whether they acknowledged it or not. The victory was in the papers published, the clients served, the problems solved. The victory was in the quiet certainty of her own competence. The victory was in not needing their validation, because she'd found her own. Laura opened her laptop and checked her project dashboard. 6 active clients, 2 pending proposals, the state contract moving forward. Her calendar was full for the next 3 months. Her bank account reflected years of disciplined success. She thought about that 7-year-old girl who learned she was disappointing before she even understood what the word meant. The teenager who made herself invisible to avoid comparison. The young woman who built her entire professional life in the shadows of family indifference. She wished she could go back and tell that girl, they're wrong about you. They're looking at the wrong things, measuring success with broken instruments, seeing what they expect instead of what's real. But you don't need them to be right about you. You just need to be right about yourself. She wished she could tell her, one day a stranger will see you more clearly in 5 minutes than your family has in 30 years. And that will change everything. Not because they'll finally understand, but because you'll finally know for certain that the problem was never you. Laura closed her laptop and looked out at the Chicago skyline, bright with evening lights. Tomorrow she'd present another session. She'd network, collaborate, continue building her reputation in the field she loved. Next week she'd return home, to her work, her life, her hard-won peace. And somewhere, her family was learning to reconcile the daughter they decided she was with the woman she'd actually become. That was their journey now. Laura's journey was already complete. She'd won, not loudly, not dramatically, but completely.